Welcome to the Knoxville Writers Guild, which has been helping writers improve and market their writing skills for almost 30 years. We're very glad to have you with us tonight. Looking ahead, we hope you'll join us on March 20th when David Dykes from Mexico will lead a workshop that explores fantasy writing. And on April 1st for National Poetry Month, Linda Parsons and Stella Sue Lee will give the program Love, Loss, and Morning Light. And this is the only program that we just had to cancel last spring when we were trying to get things going. So we're really glad they can come back. And that night we will also hear the winning entries from our poetry contest, which got, I think, 61 entries. We got a really good turnout. Pleased about that. And you can learn more about upcoming programs at knoxvillewritersguild.org. And now our fearless secretary, Victoria Rashke, will introduce tonight's speaker. Victoria.
Great, thank you. It is a pleasure to introduce Lisa Allen-Agostini. She is a writer, editor, and stand-up comedian from Trinidad and Tobago. She's the author of the surprisingly funny domestic noir novel, The Bread the Devil Need, which is forthcoming May 2021. I'll also add here, she has another book forthcoming at some point from Thousand Bolt Press. When that happens, we'll make sure you guys know. She's also the author of 2 YA novels, Home Home, which came out in 2020, and The Chalice Project, which was 2008, and a collection of poems, Swallowing the Sky, which is 2016. And she co-edited the anthology Trinidad Noir in 2009. She was a journalist for more than 2 decades before she became a stand-up comedian as part of the feminist comedy duo FemComTT. She writes, acts, and co-produces comedy videos and a twice-weekly comedy Facebook Live called The Given Trouble Show. Lisa is also the closest thing I have to a sister-in-law because she is Keifel's ex-wife, if any of you wondered where the Agostini came from. So it is a pleasure to introduce her, and I know you will enjoy her talk tonight.
Thank you. And I prefer the term wife-in-law. So thank you for the very kind introduction, and thank you for having me. I'm going to go straight into the presentation. So if Keifel would begin.
Oh, man. Does it have sound? I'm not here.
It is actually a silent film, but
okay, all right.
But there is a soundtrack, but I don't know why you're not hearing it. But it's a silent film, you're not missing any dialogue.
Hearing.
So, my name is Lisa Allen-Agostini. I wrote and starred in the film you just watched. It's a short film, obviously, and it's silent. You didn't miss any dialogue. There's some funny music and sound effects, but essentially, that's the film. I've been a writer my whole life since I was a little girl, and I've written all the things. Poems, songs, novels, short fiction, stage plays. I was a reporter and feature writer and columnist and editor during a journalism career that spanned over 2 decades. And a few years ago, I decided I wanted to learn screenwriting, and I took a couple of courses. And when I lost my damn mind and quit journalism to become a full-time stand-up comedian 2 years ago, I knew I had to make video content to be relevant. And I'm not the one to do a TikTok video, no. So I write these comedy shorts. And Mango Season is clearly influenced by George Romero. I mean, obviously, right? But it's really a sad story about an OCD woman trying to eat a mango without making a mess. I mean, that's the core of it, that she's there with the knife and the little plate. And she's horrified that, this is how Trinidadians eat mangoes, not with so much mess, but this is how they do it. You know, they peel it with their teeth, and there's inevitably a lot of juice running down on your arm, you know, it's messy. So for somebody who is a little OCD and wants to be tidy, it's a nightmare, really, you know? So it's based on my life, you could say, although it's slightly exaggerated because I don't use Wedgwood plates to eat my mango in real life. But in this video, there's a little Wedgwood plate. And that's where the humor comes from. The most painful, personal things in our lives, that's where humor lives. I'm from Trinidad and Tobago, which is the place where the songs Rum and Coca-Cola and Who Let the Dogs Out originated. You know those songs, obviously, right? And they're both funny songs, but did you know that each one of them is a musical, satirical commentary on society with a terrific beat that you can dance to? My country has a rich tradition of humor in public art and public commentary, public oratory, sorry. And this is very evident during Carnival, where there are a lot of jokes in the music, jokes in the costumes, jokes in the performances. But humor in Trinidad Carnival is a whole other workshop, and today we're not doing that one. But take my word for it, it's part and parcel of how Trinidadians kind of see the world. In Trinidadian literature too, there's often a lot of humor. We have serious writers who are seriously funny. I'm sure you've had a laugh while reading Naipaul, for example. Now, V.S. Naipaul is our most famous son of the soil other than Brian Lara. But you're American, so never mind. He's a cricketer. The whole rest of the world knows about him. He's like the Michael Jordan of cricket. Oh, you're American. So cricket is, never mind. But Naipaul's short story, The Night Watchman's Occurrence Book, which is in a collection he has called A Flag on the Island. It's hilarious. It's an absurd story about a hotel security officer. He has to log these increasingly bizarre incidents in the titular occurrence book. And it's just like it escalates and escalates and escalates. It's just, by the end of the story, everything is just a disaster, and it's quite funny. Slide, please. I think you missed one, but that's okay. Irma Bombeck, Douglas Adams, Gary Larson, Joseph Heller, Gary Trudeau, and you. Many, many great writers use humor extensively without being considered humor writers. And satire, like Naipaul does, is only one way to be funny in literary writing, and there are others. One of my favorite books is To Kill a Mockingbird, and that derives its considerable humor from the perspective of the protagonist, which is she's a blunt little girl who calls it as she sees it, and she recounts the charming, often racist quirks of her relatives and neighbors. And I'm going to read a little excerpt. My children, I've had this copy of To Kill a Mockingbird since I was 12, and it looks at, my children bought me a new copy, which I can't find now, so I just returned to the old one. So this is an excerpt from that. Today, Aunt Alexandra and her missionary circle were fighting the good fight all over the house. From the kitchen, I heard Mrs. Grace Merriweather giving a report in the living room on the squalid lives of the Marooners, it sounded like to me. They put the women out in huts when their time came, whatever that was. They had no sense of family. I know that'll distress Auntie. They subjected children to terrible ordeals when they were 13. They were crawling with yaws and airworms. They chewed up and spat out the bark of a tree into a communal pot and then got drunk on it. Immediately after, the ladies adjourned for refreshments. It was customary for every circle hostess to invite her neighbors in for refreshments, be they Baptists or Presbyterians, which accounted for the presence of Miss Rachel, sober as a judge, Miss Maudie, and Miss Stephanie Crawford. Rather nervous, I took a seat beside Miss Maudie and wondered why ladies put on their hats to go across the street. Ladies in bunches always filled me with vague apprehension and a firm desire to be elsewhere. But this feeling was what Aunt Alexandra called being spoiled. The ladies were cool in fragile pastel prints. Most of them were heavily powdered but unrouged. The only lipstick in the room was Tangy Natural. Cutex Natural sparkled on their fingernails, but some of the younger ladies wore rose. They smelled heavenly. I sat quietly, having conquered my hands by tightly gripping the arms of the chair, and waited for someone to speak to me. Miss Maudie's gold bridge twinkled. "You're mighty dressed up, Miss Jean Louise," she said. "Where are your breeches today?" "Under my dress." I hadn't meant to be funny, but the ladies laughed. My cheeks grew hot as I realized my mistake, but Miss Maudie looked gravely down at me. She never laughed at me unless I meant to be funny. In the sudden silence that followed, Miss Stephanie Crawford called from across the room, "What you gonna be when you grow up, Jean Louise? A lawyer?" "No, I hadn't thought about it," I answered, grateful that Miss Stephanie was kind enough to change the subject. Hurriedly, I began choosing my vocation. Nurse? Aviator? Well, why, shoot, I thought you wanted to be a lawyer. You already commenced going to court. The ladies laughed again. "That Stephanie's a card," somebody said. Miss Stephanie was encouraged to pursue the subject. "Don't you want to grow up to be a lawyer?" Miss Maudie's hand touched mine and I answered mildly enough, "No, just a lady." Miss Stephanie eyed me suspiciously, decided that I meant no impertinence, and contented herself with, "Well, you won't get very far until you start wearing dresses more often." Miss Maudie's hand closed tightly on mine, and I said nothing. Its warmth was enough. So in that excerpt, which I think is charming, you have this excruciatingly bad tea party, but seen through the child's eyes, it's a riot. And if you're asking how it was done, well, how do you write funny? There are some suggestions. You can use funny language, funny words. For example, there's something you'll read about called the K rule, where K words and hard G words are supposedly very funny to Americans. Good golly, Miss Molly, for example. Alliteration on the whole is often very funny, as is rhyme. Reference again, good golly, Miss Molly. You can also use funny metaphors. I know a guy who his friends called the Maytag man because all his girlfriends had the physique of kitchen equipment. He was the Maytag man. It's cruel, it's sexist, but it's a very effective metaphor because you hear the Maytag man and you're like, why do they call him that? And you hear, oh yes, okay, I see it now. So it's very effective. And also, don't let anybody tell you to avoid cliches like the plague. See what I did there? They can be useful if you consider a cliche remix, meaning you take the start and then you change the ending so that it's not what is expected. After all, nothing ventured, no best-selling humor book gained. You can go through a piece of writing you find funny to see how many of those devices the writer uses. So you can, pick any piece that you find funny and go through them. Additionally, in your writing, you can use funny anecdotes, especially those anecdotes with an unexpected or ironic twist. And those anecdotes, you can use them for character development within a larger piece, in your dialogue or in the action, or they could become the basis of a creative project. So this next video came out of an anecdote my comedy partner told me. This one needs the sound archival. So if it's not playing the sound on the slide, could you play it on the thing? Can you find it?
Is there audio?
Oh, is there no audio?
No.
This is very frustrating. I wish I had known this earlier. Okay, I'll tell you what happens. In this video, so my comedy partner came and told me this story about how she had gone to licensing because she was transferring a car. And it took forever. And she had to keep going back day after day because she got one form and then they'd tell her, no, that's the wrong form. And then you'd have to go back to a different part of the office, see somebody else, and then start all over because, it's just like this endless nightmare of bureaucracy. And so in this video, I have the client coming in and saying, I want to do a vehicle transfer. And this woman who is at counter 1 tells her, no, you need to go to counter 4. And there's literally the same moment she changes her glasses and she puts on a different jacket. She changes the sign on it that says counter 4. And you have to just basically line up over and over with this one form. And then, oh no, it's the wrong form. And then, oh no, you have to get this other thing. And then, oh no. So by the end of the video, the client goes crazy and starts screaming, so it's like, it is a bureaucratic nightmare, but it's based on a true story. And so I took the anecdote and made it into a little movie. It's about 3 minutes long. And so, but we all know the nightmare of dealing with bureaucracy, especially within what you all call it, the DMV.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we all know what that's like. And we know it's not funny at all. When you're in it, you want to kill somebody, right? And so next slide, please. Life is hard. Laugh more. Jokes can make tragedy more bearable, as in life, so in art. And as Victoria mentioned, I have this book coming up that is, it's like a real tragic book. The main theme is gender-based violence, and it's in a lot of ways a very sad book, but this part of it isn't sad. Just gonna read a little excerpt. So in this part of the novel, the protagonist, whose name is Alethea, is in a party. She's in a big outdoor party. Now the book is written in Trinidad Creole, so I hope you understand. All this time, music ponging hard from the direction of the stage. It had speakers stacked up about 2-story high and 15-foot wide on either side of it. Cover on top with a blue tarpaulin with scaffolds holding up the speakers on the stage. The stage itself had no lights on, but you could see people in black clothes running around, walking around. And then the band come on in the dark and start to sound check. A man from the crowd, bareback and in a short pants with sneakers, climb up the scaffolds and hold on to them with one hand, whining like a madman to the song of the soca the DJ playing. As I watching that, I see a woman come flying up in the sky from out of nowhere. When I look, it's because she on some kind of cloth, like a blanket or something, and 6 strong men around, she flinging she up in the air and catching she back. I start to look around at the crowd. It had all kind of people, young, old, dress up, dress down, man, woman, and child. Well, not exactly children, but it had some teenagers in there for sure. Most of them was standing up facing the direction of the stage, drinking and chatting with one another, but some of them was drunk already, sitting down on the grass with their head between their knees. Plenty people was dancing. It had a girl just next to me facing a man with one ankle up on his shoulder and joking up against his pants zipper. She wearing her tongs. You could see she liver and all from that angle. Tamika herself, that's the girlfriend, had she 2 hands on the ground, bent over double and whining back on somebody's crutch. I feel like a granny, 40 years and in my first and only soca fete, doing a polite social whine, barely touching my waist from side to side. Some of the things I see the people doing, the women especially, was things I would do in the bedroom, but not out in public. Me do that? You're mad or what? And as I said, this is in a part of the novel. So it's a big outside party. And immediately after the scene with the party and the whole, all the craziness and people dancing all how, there's this absolutely tragic moment. And in fact, as I said before, the events of the story are terribly serious. So there's gun violence, child sexual abuse, intimate partner violence, and a downright gothic family story. I mean, complete with like old house in the bush and a creepy old lady. It's totally gothic. But because the writing is interspersed with this light, funny commentary, most of the readers have said that they find the novel a quick read and they don't walk away feeling oppressed or triggered. And the same is true for my novel, Home Home. It's a young adult story about a teenage girl with depression and anxiety. At the start of the novel, she's recovering from a suicide attempt. Like when we meet her, she's recovering from a suicide attempt. So, fun times, really great, upbeat story. No, it's but her humor, mostly, the dark, snarky teenage humor, you know how we are as teenagers. Even when she's having her worst moments, she's joking. But I know she's not the only one. A lot of us do that. When we're feeling most oppressed, we make jokes. It's a normal human kind of reaction to try to lighten things up. Slide. No, I think, yeah, thank you. Yes, good, that's the one. So humor can be used to lift the mood of a dark story, but you can also just write a funny story because it's funny, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's room for stories that are funny for the sake of being funny. Just because a story is funny doesn't mean it doesn't offer value, I think a funny story can be very effective. I edited an anthology called Trinidad Noir, which is their noir stories. I know I say noir funny, but forgive me. N-O-I-R.
Yeah, you're doing it.
So, so it's noir stories. And these 2 particular ones are the funniest in the collection. One is called How to Make Photocopies at the National Archive. And it's a story about a foreign-based academic who comes into the National Archive in Trinidad. And he meets this maddening bureaucracy. This woman will not let him take more than a page and a pencil into the room at a time. And she won't budge. And then she exerts this kind of sexual extortion on him. And the story, like I said, without the humor, it might be interesting, but this humor in this case is what makes the story most memorable. There's also a story called The Rape. And this is a story about these two spinsters who live in the country, and they have absolutely nothing going on in their life. And they used to stand up and watch this man running every morning. And one day, one of them finds the man, quote unquote, dead, but certain parts of him are very much alive. And she's a spinster. So she takes advantage of what she thinks is, a gift, only to have the man eyes open, while she's in flagrante delicto. So it was, the story itself is written in a very funny way. And then of course there's this denouement with the guy opening his eyes, So it's a very funny story, but it's most memorable because of the humor. I have a story called A Fine Specimen, which is a story about a woman who meets a man, or she thinks he's a man, at carnival, and she spends the whole of this carnival dancing with the man, and then eventually she wakes up on a spaceship because he wasn't a man, he was an alien, and he abducted her. So it's really an alien abduction story. But this is based on my life because I met my current husband while in a Juve band. Juve is a part of our carnival. And I met him in this band. And within 3 months, I had moved up to his community, and he basically kidnapped me. And it's a community that was strange to me, so I felt like an alien for a while. So, my own story became the basis for a version of it that, so my husband is not an alien, just to be clear. And I wasn't abducted, but the basis of the encounter and the whole thing became the basis of that story. Mostly it was an excuse to write about whining, which is a dance, which we should do another workshop on that one. It's a dance that we do to soca and calypso music. All right. So humor can also be used to counterpoint grief or tragedy. Last year, I was commissioned by the NGC Bocas Lit Fest, which is the main literary festival in this part of the Caribbean, and it's based in Trinidad and Tobago. They commissioned me to write a short story about the February Revolution, which was an incident in our national history where there was a lot of violence, and it was about racial justice, and it was a huge moment in our national story. So I was commissioned to write this piece. But the piece I came up with is actually quite funny, even though it is based in this moment of tragedy. And the piece that I came up with is an epistolary, God, I can't say that word. It's letters. Epistolary narrative. Yeah? Okay, it's letters.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And it's written from the perspective, it's only one perspective. So it's not an exchange of letters. It's just the letters from one person to another. And the person who's writing these letters is a teenage girl who has just discovered that she has a very similar life story to one of the women who was killed as a kind of consequence of that February Revolution, named Beverly Jones. And so Beverly Jones was a young guerrilla in a group of freedom fighters or terrorists, depending on your perspective, who was killed by police, as a kind of a consequence of the revolution. And in my story, meeting Beverly, the girl, she's just started corresponding with her absentee father. She's never met this man before. She discovers her revolutionary potential through experiencing tragedy. The background to and the events of the story are pretty heavy. But the earlier parts of the story are hilarious. The character often uses hashtags in her letters. Yes, hashtags in a letter make no sense, but she's using hashtags in the letters. Hashtag teenagers, I guess. She mocks her father constantly. And just like in real life, she uses jokes to cover up the pain she's feeling. So this is how it starts. Dear Father, I was surprised to get your letter today. I was surprised to get your letter, period. First, I didn't know people still wrote letters on paper with pens, put them in envelopes and mailed them to other people. Who does that? And why? Secondly, I thought you were a figment of my mother's imagination or a really impressive lie she told once and stuck to for the rest of my life. I don't know why you're writing me now. Yours, I guess, Benicia. So that's the first letter. And as it goes on, every letter she writes, she finds a new sarky name for him. So in the next one, she calls him Dear Sperm Donor. In one, she calls him Dear Dad, you know. And each time she signs off, she has another little sarky comment where she goes, yours, well, the DNA don't lie, you know, those kinds of things. She's very sarcastic, but it's all very funny. And by the end of the story, though, after the big tragic climax of the story, the sarcasm and that humor bleed away in the story. And it leaves a more sober acceptance of not just her relationship with her dad, but the real weight of being a Black revolutionary. But the humor, I think, makes it relatable, which is not a word I love. I don't find the word relatable. But yeah, so I think it works because of that counterpoint of the terrible grief and tragedy in the story with, you know, the light tone at the start that sort of gets more serious as it goes on. Let me be frank. Despite the list and other lists that you'll find online, there's no formula for what's funny and what approaches will work for you in your work when you try to incorporate humor in your writing. You have to try things and see if they work. Pacing is very important in all comedy, right? And I don't know that you can be taught the right place to put the jokes in your novel about the serial murdering banjo player. I don't know if there's like a course that could teach you that. You just have to work that out for yourself. There's no real formula for that. But there is a formula for writing a joke if you want to try stand-up comedy. Slide. Right, so How to Write a Joke According to Judy Carter's The Comedy Bible. It's a great book, I highly recommend it. Here it is. And bless Judy Carter for this book. If you have any interest in writing comedy, whether it's for performance or for scripts or literary work, this is a godsend. Get it, read it, study it. I'm not going to give a Judy Carter Comedy Bible workshop, but I will attempt to share one of her basic tenets here. And that is attitude plus topic plus premise, or the serious part, plus act out, mix and act out the funny part. So it's an equation, if you could think about it as an equation. And the serious part is, well, Google search gave me a definition of a premise. It is a previous statement or proposition from which another is inferred or follows as a conclusion. If the premise is true, then the conclusion must be true. And every joke starts with a premise. Your premise should not be too general because funny is in the details, as Judy Carter says. For the purposes of this workshop, I'll start with the premise. As I've aged, my body has betrayed me. Now, the gospel according to Judy Carter tells us that a good premise is insightful and original. And possibly my premise is neither, but bear with me. As I've aged, my body has betrayed me. To this, you add an attitude, and Judy Carter offers only 4 attitudes. So your attitude towards the premise. The idea is it will either be weird, hard, scary, or stupid. So my attitude is hard. Aging is hard because your body betrays you, right? So you have the attitude. plus the premise. And now we add the topic. What in particular about aging is hard? One consequence I find very hard. When I was young and going clubbing, I could feel the urge to pee now and flirt with 5 guys and the bartender, line up to go to the bathroom and still be okay. Now, I'm 47. When I have to pee, I have to pee. Like right now. There's no like, we can't discuss this. We can't like have a, no, I have to pee, I have to pee. Right? Another consequence is that of aging, or aging badly in my case, I am so stiff when I wake up in the morning. I feel like a zombie. I move like a zombie. All right? So those are that's my premise, topic, and attitude. Right? And those are the serious things. And now we add what we call the act out. So the act out is a physical part of a joke. If you've ever watched stand-up comedy, you see that there's 2 parts of the performance. There's the words that are coming out, but there's also what the body is saying and doing. And that is what we call the act out. In my joke here, I start off, now, ladies, you all know this. You know, when you need to go to the bathroom and you have to stand with your legs like this, really hard. So I know I'm not the only one who does this. So y'all can deny all you want. You know, you have to squeeze your thighs together really hard. So I perform that act of standing up with my legs pressed together so hard that I've lost circulation in my legs, just to avoid having an accident. I will not be shamed. I know I'm not the only one. And then I act out being so stiff that I walk like a zombie while my legs are crossed. Yeah, you've seen the film, so you know what I mean when I say act like a zombie, right? So you're performing it with your body, legs crossed, and I'm walking like a zombie, and then I sing, move, get out the way, get out the way, get out the way, because obviously I need to go to the bathroom. And then I do a further remix, which is to say, the worst stiffness is in the morning. And of course, the worst urge to use the bathroom is also in the morning. Yeah. So I do the remix, which is all of that plus a further act out where I wake up stiff, I can't hold it in, and the inevitable happens and I have an accident. But then I sing to the tune of Zombie by the Cranberries. I pee my bed, I pee my bed, zombie, 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 hey, 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 oh, oh, oh. So not a great premise, but we get there in the end because of the formula. Attitude plus topic plus premise plus act out plus mix plus act out. Serious part plus funny part. And the last thing is also a video, which I don't know if it'll play, but you can show it to them, Kaifel, because again, they don't really need to hear it. Oh, maybe you do need to hear it. So essentially, this is one of a series of shorts I did last year with my comedy partner, and it's called "Say It Like a Trini." And the little funny face is saying Trinidadian words or words pronounced as Trinidadians say it. So, for example, tree, which is how we say 3, right? And so this video series plays to my unique skill set as an enthusiast of Trinidad Creole and also a word nerd. So I get to combine my two loves together into a comedy video, which also happens to be kind of useful because a lot of Trinidadians who are abroad, show it to their children. This is how you say water. It's not water, it's water. And that kind of thing. So that's it for me. That's it. So if you have any questions, I am here. Thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I hope that made sense.
Yes, definitely. I have a question.
Yes.
So like the formula, if you're talking about like looking at the kind of the act out, remix, act out, like how do you translate that? Like if you're writing prose, like it's not going to be stand up, like.
Oh no, those are specifically jokes
For stand up. Okay.
So those are specifically for stand up.
Okay.
In writing prose, I think, the stuff that I said earlier, you can use funny language. There are words that are funny. Conniption. It's a funny word. You know what I mean? They're funny words, so you can use funny words, or you can use, like, as I said, alliteration is always funny. What's the other thing? Rhyme is funny. Repetition. There's some things that you can use in, but like, as I said, it is more, what do you find funny? What do you find funny? Trust your sense of humor.
Yeah, one of the things I always love in stand-up comedy is a callback, which I think can work in prose.
Oh, totally. It's just a motif. So a callback for people who don't know the term is, so like if at the start of my set, and I do the what I call the pea zombie joke, for obvious reasons. After the start of the set, I do my pea zombie joke. And then later on in the set, I say something about zombie, automatically it'll ring a little bell in the audience's head. And that's called a callback. It's where you take an aspect of the joke and you bring it back over and over in different ways. And totally in literature, it works very well in literary writing because you have the motif, you have the idea of returning to a touch point. It's quite, even if you're looking at some classic comedy writing like Jeeves and so on, you'll see callbacks in it a lot.
What do you do with your shorts that you make? Where do you put those out? You put them on YouTube, or what do you do?
Yeah, Until Hollywood Calls. They're available on YouTube. I consider this my training period where I'm learning to make films and write films and, getting better. But right now they're on YouTube.
Okay. And do you have a team that helps you film them, or?
Sort of. Myself and my comedy partner.
Okay.
We work together. I write and she directs. We both act. We both produce. But we need, conveniently, her husband's a cameraman and one of my brothers is a cameraman as well.
Oh, yeah.
So we do have some people that, like her sister does the costumes. We really bring our family into it just because we don't have the budget yet. But that's it.
Yeah. I was a journalist for a long time. You don't make a lot of money there either.
No, but trust me, you still do better than doing stand-up comedy because unless you're like a comedy star, oh girl, I lost like 50 pounds. But it's okay, I'm better for it.
Yeah.
I will put the link to Lisa's YouTube channel in the chat for anybody who wants
Thank
it.
you.
Oh, great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Lisa, can you talk about pacing a little bit? I think that's hard.
Well, it is hard in general. I mean, pacing, language has rhythms, and you don't want your language in one piece to be all the same pace. Because if all the language is just tumbling, 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 there's no pause for the reader to think and absorb. But if all your language is slow, slow and plodding, then the reader kind of just sort of zones out. So you want to make sure that you have a mixture of different kinds of pace within the writing. And when you also think about the sort of dramatic or plot arc, you want to make sure that the action is always going forward, right? In terms of the motivation of the character to get whatever it is the character is trying to get. You want to make sure the progression of the plot is always going forward, but it doesn't always have to go forward at the same speed. Yeah? So he could be driving madly down the road because he has to get da 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 da, and then he has a flat tire and he has to wait. And the waiting makes it more tense. And so he gets it for tire fixed and he's driving on the road, da, 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 and he reaches where he reached and the person not there. So he has to now, you know what I mean? So you have always during your writing, you always have this balance between the forward momentum and time for reflection. And I tend to write humor into it. I tend to write humor into my pieces to help with that pacing too. So there's this, this book is it's called Thicker Than Water. And I have a story in it called GNTs and Rita Bloody Marley. And the premise of it is that there's this old woman whose niece comes to help her tidy the woman's husband who's ill and he's bedbound. But because he was such a terrible husband and he used to beat the wife when he was young and strong, now that the wife is walking around constantly drunk on gin and tonic, but she's walking around and her husband is in bed, she tortures him. She plays his favorite music at the top of the volume and forces him to eat things he doesn't like. It's basically about elder abuse. But the story is funny because the character of the aunt, the same woman who's torturing the man, she's this very charming little drunk old lady. She's very middle class. And she's like, oh, darling, da, 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 da. But, you know, secretly she's torturing her husband. So it's a kind of the humor is there, but underneath the humor is this really dark story about abuse and revenge. You know, and I use the humor to kind of, like I said, I mean, I write about terribly depressing things. It's the only way I can survive, you know, by putting in some jokes in there, because otherwise, it's just too hard.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
May I ask a question?
Yes, of course.
Dialogue. Do you use a lot of dialogue in your prose? In your story?
I do. I use a lot of dialogue in my prose because there's more of the show, don't tell. I find dialogue is one of the best ways to show a character. And for exposition and stuff, I prefer to show than to tell. So I do use a lot of dialogue. And it is another good opportunity to insert humor as well. Because you'd be surprised how funny our day-to-day little interactions with each other can be.
That example is part of sort of the I don't know what I'm saying. The hard thing about doing some things that are funny, that is, I've been thinking, what would you write funny about COVID, you know, for instance, or then a lot of things that are funny are also making fun of people. And that's a bit treacherous too. So I guess if you can make elder abuse funny, you've been very successful. I mean, there's really a lot of questions about what you can get away with in trying to write funny.
Exactly. It is exactly that. What can you get away with? And that's why I said, you know, it has to come. I can't tell you what you will write funny. You have to know what you can write funny. You know, if at this moment by the way, I am writing funny stuff about COVID. I have a script right now that I'm going to shoot next week, God willing, and all our free partners available, about a woman who goes, the same characters from the bureaucracy in the DMV office, except the client now is coming in to pay a mask, a fine for not wearing a mask, and miscommunication ensues. So yes, you can make jokes about anything, COVID, anything, honestly, if you try hard enough. And if you know, I mean, not all jokes are in good taste, but then again, not all writing is necessarily meant to be tasteful. You know what I mean? And it depends on who you are and your approach and so on. But you can literally write jokes about anything. And in fact, I would even challenge you to write jokes about anything, because as I said, the most painful, horrible experiences, that's where the comedy lies. That's where it lies. You know? And making jokes at the expense of other people, it's a real thing. In my stand-up performances, I tend to not, like I don't do humor. Like, as a principle, we've decided that we don't do humor that is deprecating to people. You know, I mean, if we're making a joke about ourselves, that's ourselves, but we're not going to be, you know, picking on audience members and things like that. We made a decision about our performance that we're not going to be that kind of comic. And that's our choice, because we're feminist comedians. So it's actually part of our brand. But, you know, it really just depends on you, you know, and your approach, honestly. And like I said, there's no prescription. You just have to try it. You try it, it don't work. You try something else.
Yeah.
Like all writing.
Yeah.
I think, Lisa, what you said about the like comedy coming from the most painful parts. I mean, I come over from a family of gallows humor. Like, that's how we deal with everything. And I've always thought like that's the steam valve for me. And for a lot of people is like when things are at the absolute worst, if you're not funny, then you just lay down and die, that kind of approach to comedy. So I think what Bob said, like, you can make anything funny. Now, whether or not anyone else will find it funny is different, but you know, you can make it funny to yourself. But I always think of like there's a difference. If you do write about people, like there's a huge difference between punching up and punching down.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Agreed.
Any other questions?
Not really a question, but just kind of what you were saying just made me think about something that happened to me a few years ago, and it will fit into what project I've been working on. But I got stuck in my fence. I have a privacy fence and it had a slat open, and I got stuck on it New Year's Day, and it was muddy, and I'm like halfway through it and half my body's through the fence, the other half is on one side of the fence, and there is nobody to come around. I can't get to my phone. I don't even think I had my phone with me. And I'm just stuck there wondering what the hell I'm gonna do. But I think I like your idea about trying to include humor in things that are kind of can be serious or
Yeah, I'm sure that when you were stuck, it wasn't funny at all because you were probably panicking and so on. But in retrospect, it's such a
Yeah.
bizarre little story that you're like, you know, this is funny. And when you're telling it to people, it's a funny story that you're telling them. It's not a tragic story where, you know,
right.
I was trapped in my fence. So I can't even say it with a straight face.
I
It's
know.
not a tragic story when you tell it. It's a funny story when you tell it.
Right.
So, you know, you already have identified the humor in it.
Right.
So if you're writing, you know, a bigger project, you could even have that happen to one of the characters where not necessarily a fence, but what if they get locked in a little room and all they have is like a fire truck, you know, and they're like, they can't get out. They've been banging on the door and then they start playing with the fire truck. And, you know, I don't know. I'm just saying that
Yeah.
there are opportunities to take the anecdote and use it in a different way. What is the essential thing that was funny about being stuck on the fence?
Yeah.
Oh my
On New
God,
Year's
you were
Day, when
literally
you're supposed
stuck
to be
on the
getting it.
fence.
Yeah. When you're supposed to be getting a new year and things are supposed to be looking up and it's like,
Yeah.
okay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Anybody else? Okay. Well, Lisa, thank you so much for being with us. This was great.
Thank you so much for having me. And I
enjoyed
hope it was useful
Yeah.
and funny.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thanks,
you so
Lisa.
much.
Thank you.
Yay.
Got it.
See you again soon.